If you're thinking about including an airbrush in your hobby workflow, then you've come to the right place. This will be a two-part tutorial, with this part focusing on the before you buy essentials, and the second part focusing on the after you buy steps to get started the right way, learning the correct techniques to not clog and immediately hate your airbrush. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. First of all, do you actually need an airbrush? There's no reason why you cannot create amazing paint jobs without an airbrush. However, there are a number of ways an airbrush will make it easier, and it kind of feels like the next step in improving at the hobby. Here are some examples of ways that an airbrush will help. A very common practice in mini painting is the zenithal highlight. This is when you base coat the miniature in black and then spray it white from a high angle to hit all the areas that sunlight would hit. This could potentially be done with rattle cans, but there is far less control, and it'll be hard to get a good result. Another example with base coating: if you live somewhere hot and often humid, like myself, then rattle cans may only be able to be used at certain times of the day, and you may have a streak of days where the weather does not align at all. If the weather is too hot, then the paint will dry before it hits the model. If the humidity is too high, then the surface of the model may bubble, leaving you with no choice but to remove the paint and start again. One more example: the results are just super smooth. You have full control over those base coats and highlights. Even when you're applying your final layers of varnish, you wouldn't even know that the model had been varnished because it went on so smooth and flawlessly. The airbrush just helps you achieve better results with less effort, and that's a pretty good thing. I also recently base coated 55 Stormcast, and it took about 3 hours with the airbrush. Now comparatively, if I was to do that with just a regular brush or even a rattle can, it would take significantly longer because the preparation time would be much higher and the actual process itself would take longer. So there are definitely some efficiency advantages too. Selecting an airbrush. There are a few different types of airbrushes to choose from. For miniature painting, it is often recommended to use a gravity feed airbrush like these. They tend to be easier to clean than the alternatives and have very little wasted paint and make it simple to add more paint, or quickly clean out and change colours, which is something you'll probably want to do quite frequently. There are a few different price ranges in airbrushes. You probably don't want to go with the cheapest on the market. They tend to be a lot harder to clean and less precise, which may make you quit before you've even started. Here I have two mid-tier airbrushes that are suitable for beginners. The Sparmax Max 3, which is quite cheap, around $100 AUD, and the Iwata Eclipse CS, which is twice the price at around $200 AUD. Either of these airbrushes would be a great starting point. I know in America the Badger brand airbrushes are quite popular as well. There's a lot of good ones to choose from. These airbrushes look very similar, so you might be wondering why one is double the price of the other. To me, it comes down to the internal mechanisms and design. If I disassemble these airbrushes, you'll see I need an additional tool to get the nozzle off on the cheaper one. But on this one, it comes straight off, which is great for the cleaning process, but it also allows you to easily remove the needle through the front of the airbrush. Why does this matter? Well, it means you're not dragging paint through the internal mechanisms every time you remove the needle for cleaning. A minor detail, sure, but this is a sort of convenience you get from paying a little bit more for it. I feel like the design of the paint delivery in here works a little bit better too. If I use the Eclipse, I can generally paint things a lot faster than when I'm using the Max 3. The paint just works a lot better and I don't run into a lot of problems. We'll come back to the internals of the airbrush in the next video, when we cover how to use it. Okay, so like I said, these are what I'd consider mid-tier airbrushes. What do you get if you start spending $500 to $1,000 on an airbrush? Well, in general they tend to have a smaller needle, allowing for more accurate and detailed lines. However, they also need more professional level of skill to operate. The triggers have a much higher learning curve. They're also much easier to clog, so understanding your paints and how to thin them is a lot more important. Also, having a smaller needle, you probably wouldn't want to use it for base coating as it would take a lot longer. What I recommend to look for is an airbrush in the mid tier and then work your way up later, as you want to do more detailed work. You'll still prefer to use a mid tier 3 to 4mm needle airbrush for base coating and varnishing, so you're not losing anything by starting with a mid tier airbrush. What to buy and what I use? The very basic shopping list is an airbrush, of course, an air compressor. I use a AS186. It is a generic brandless air compressor. You'll find hundreds of these listed on eBay or Amazon. I like it because it isn't too noisy and has a tank which keeps the pressure consistent. I will add a note here though that recently, as I was batch painting my Stormcast, the air compressor did get very hot, and after about an hour it would stop working for a while, so it is very prone to overheating. I wasn't in a particularly hot environment, it was around 22 degrees when I was doing that painting, so yeah, it has a bit of a heating issue, but other than that it's a pretty solid air compressor. And the third thing you'll need is a air hose. Make sure that both ends match the size of the connection on your airbrush and compressor. The airbrushes I have are a very standard size, however I know in the US, Badger I think has a different type of connection, so you just need to check that out before you get your hose. Now those are what I would consider the bare minimum to be able to airbrush, but I'd also consider these essentials. A face mask. If you're desperate, a medical dust mask is better than nothing, but if you're doing a lot of painting, I highly recommend a proper respirator mask like this. While not all paint is toxic, it still isn't great to have a lot of paint particles in your lungs, so consider your safety glasses. So this may seem like overkill, but there really is a lot of particles in the air that you can't really see but may irritate your eyes over long sessions. Also, some paints are less friendly to your eyes than others. Gloves. If your skin is in any way sensitive to paint, it is a good idea to get some disposable gloves. It also helps prevent the natural oils that occur in your skin to get over the model. Now on to the less essential things that will make your life a bit easier. Spray booth. There are plenty of cheap ones available, but I went with this one. It cost a little bit more, but had controls for both the brightness of the LEDs and the speed of the fans. I feel this decision was worth it for me. A spray booth helps keep your workplace clean, gives you even light distribution over the subject, and takes a lot more of the particles out of the air, so when you take your mask off, the air is safe to breathe. Cleaning pot. So airbrush cleaner is not good to inhale, so having a pot allows you to spray cleaner through the nozzle and have the air filtered. It also gives you somewhere to sit the airbrush if you don't have a stand for it. Quick release joins. If you have more than one airbrush or would like to disconnect your airbrush without letting the air out of your compressor, then this is how you can do it. It's a really cheap thing to add, and some even have an air regulator built in, so you can make quick adjustments to your airflow. Plumbing tape. I mostly use this because I already had some lying around the house, but it just makes sure that your joins are sealed and you're not letting any excess air out of the compressor. Cleaning kit. You can pick these up relatively cheap and often consist of these pipe cleaners to scrape paint from the central area of the airbrush and a half needle to scrape paint out of the nozzle. I've only really had to use this 3 or 4 times, but it came in really handy when I had paint in places I couldn't get to with anything else. Paper towel. This is pretty much an essential just for cleaning off the airbrush needle and the exterior of the airbrush. The next thing to consider is the liquids to put through the airbrush. Hobby paints, including the ones mentioning that they are for airbrushes, will need a bit of thinning before use. Thinner and flow improver both work in a similar way. I've also heard people using glaze medium and swear by it, but I haven't tried that personally. You'll also want some form of cleaning liquid to loosen any paint remaining when you finish airbrushing for the day. You may also want to look at primers and paints that are branded for airbrushes. You can definitely use GW paints, but they can be difficult. For example, I thought I was really bad at airbrushing when I first started because it was clogging so fast, but nope. The problem was that Wraithbone is not a very cooperative paint, even if you have more thinner in the airbrush than paint. So that's something to keep in mind. There are also emerging products that may be of interest. For example, acrylic inks are showing amazing results via an airbrush. It requires no thinning and you can generally expect less speckling, so these are fantastic to try. Like all things, be cautious with what you put through the airbrush. I haven't tried alcohol-based inks or anything too exotic, but the airbrush definitely works great with acrylics. Okay, so by now you should have some idea if the airbrush is for you and what shopping list you need to pursue. Once you're all set up and ready to get started, please check out part 2 of this video and make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so you know when further videos on airbrushing and other hobby topics are released. Thank you for watching.